Hi, this video is a follow-up to my 14 no-coast hacks video. Quite a few people wanted to know what I'd recommend pairing with no-coast, so here are a few ideas that will help you get more out of it, plus 2 more bonus hacks I'll show you along the way. Now, don't be alarmed by what you see here. You don't need all of this for no-coast, nor actually any of it, as you'll see in a bit. And there's overlapping functionality in the modules here, but that said, most of these, even one on its own, will help you get a lot more out of your no-coast. My first recommendation would be pairing no-coast with a MIDI controller that has a built-in sequencer and arpeggiator. And the keystep is a great example for that, and another reason these two make a nice pair is that the keystep also has direct CV and MIDI outputs. An example of why both MIDI and CV outputs are useful was shown in my first no-coast video, where I showed you how you could use the MIDI in keystep to program an arpeggiated sequence using the keystep's MIDI output and no-coast's internal arpeggiator, and then unplug MIDI and play paraphonically on top of it using the CV outputs to control a pitch-calibrated slope oscillator. Now, that was a little bit of a hack to get 2 channels out of a 1-channel sequencer. You might want to look at different sequencers / controllers that have at least 2 channels. The BeatStep Pro is an example of such a sequencer, and it will let you program 2 parallel sequences for playing paraphonically or sequencing subharmonics, which we'll see in a bit. You gain 2 melodic sequencers with it and plenty of CV outputs, but you do lose the keyboard, so that trade-off is up to you. If you have a bigger budget and need full-size keys and more of them, check out Novation's new SL Mark III, which has an 8-track built-in sequencer with 2 MIDI and CV pitch gate mod pairs. A link to my review of the SL Mark III will be in the description. Another controller idea for no-coast could be a synth with MIDI control capabilities. On the low end, take a look at Circuit by Novation, and if your budget permits, check out some of Electron's boxes that come with built-in MIDI and CC sequencing, so you could sequence no-coast's subharmonics using CC-controlled clock divisions. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about when I say CC-controlled subharmonics, check out my original no-coast video, link below. Moving on, something else I would strongly consider pairing with no-coast is a high-quality reverb. Now, it doesn't need to be a modular reverb. It doesn't actually need to be a hardware one at all. In the previous video, I used the software version of Valhalla Shimmer, which costs $50 and is worth every penny. Here I'm using Z-DSP's Valhalla reverbs. It treats the harmonics here really nicely. Also, don't be shy to add additional guitar effects to no-coast. They're way cheaper than modules and there are plenty to choose from. Okay, so you have a controller and you have reverb. Let's talk about module pairings. The first module I'd recommend you pair no-coast with is no module at all. Rather, I recommend taking a good look at VCVRack, the open source and mostly free virtual Eurorack software. I talked about this extensively in my hybrid modular video linked below, but here's the summary. You can use any audio interface to take audio from no-coast into VCVRack, and if you needed to pass audio to no-coast, all you'd need to do is amplify to Eurorack levels with a module like SPG from ALM. And where it does get a little tricky is when you want to pass non-audio control voltage back and forth. To pass control voltage to no-coast, you'd need an audio interface with DC-coupled outputs, like the Motu audio interfaces, which means you can modulate everything on no-coast using VCVRack. If you do choose to go that route, don't forget to use a floating ring cable. Taking control voltage from no-coast to VCVRack is a little bit trickier because most audio interfaces have AC-coupled inputs as opposed to DC-coupled ones. AC-coupled inputs means that they filter out slow-moving control voltage. Now, pretty much the only game in town to solve that problem is the ES-8 from Expert Sleepers. All of its inputs and all of its outputs are DC-coupled, and they also sell expansions that you can hook up to your existing audio interfaces, and those expansions are either DC-coupled inputs or DC-coupled outputs. Anyway, bottom line, before you go out and spend money on physical hardware modules, check out VCV Rack. It's free, and if for nothing else, it has almost all the Mutable Instruments modules like Plaits and many others. Next up, I would consider pairing no-coast with a Eurorack sequencer. Now, I already talked about the sequencers in the KeyStep, B-Step Pro, and so on, so who needs a Eurorack sequencer? Well, non-Eurorack sequencers will typically have two limitations. The first is, with the exception of one or two parameters here and there, their parameters can't be controlled by CV with voltage. And the second is that they are, again with some exceptions, mostly very structured and linear. On the other hand, on the Eurorack side, you have sequencers that are built for being controlled with voltage and for sending out control voltage, like the Muxlicer and Rene, which also bring along sequencing concepts that completely throw out the window linear sequencing, like the grid-based Cartesian sequencer in Rene, for example. In this patch, for example, I have every step in Muxlicer trigger a gate on the no-coast with modulation of no-coast's multiply parameter based on the position of these faders. So if I start this, you'll hear a pattern where basically this knob is being moved by these faders, and I can also patch Muxlicer onto itself to add ratchets. So now these faders are also controlling ratchets on no-coast based on their level over here. Now, while I have this varying level signal over here, why not connect it to other places? Like, for example, through the math section here to modulate overtone. And now we can hear the second oscillator coming in through here in this position. Let's add some reverb, because why not? And while we're on the topic of Eurorack sequencers, check out also Turing machine style sequencers like the one built into Ornament and Crime and Disting, which generate random sequences of notes that can be locked into repeating sequences and can create very happy on-the-spot accidents. In this patch, I'll be using a sequence programmed into the KeyStep as my core melodic sequence. Right? These 4 bars. And then I'll be using a second sequencer, in this case the Muxlicer, to transpose the corresponding subharmonic played by no-coast's slope. Let me explain. When the balance is turned clockwise in this patch, we hear no-coast's main oscillator. When the balance is turned fully counterclockwise, we can hear the subharmonics generated by the slope oscillator. Now, if you didn't watch my previous video about no-coast, you really should, but in a nutshell, subharmonics on no-coast work by using the slope at different rates to create an oscillator at subdivisions of the main oscillator. Different fader positions on the Muxlicer will choose different subharmonics. The waveform and timbre coming out of the slope can be one of two shapes, either a triangle-ish saw coming out of the slope output, or a pulse-ish square coming out of the EOC output. In this patch, I'll be using both outputs just for fun, one going into the reverb and then another one going through the filter, which I'll patch into the reverb later on. Now I have Muxlicer set up to move forward each step in the sequence every 9 gates on the KeyStep. And I did that so the subharmonic transpositions won't match the core melody directly, but rather play sort of polymetrically. So just to give you an example, this is the main oscillator. And then as I use subharmonics, it will cycle through the sequence and play different notes every time, picking a different subharmonic. And now let's hear the 2 with a smidge of reverb. This is the main oscillator, and this is what the subharmonics sound like. And of course I can play them together. And for a little stereo field variety, I'll plug an unfiltered pulse width subharmonic into your right ear. Mess with that a bit. Another class of module you might want to consider adding to no-coast is a filter. Now, while there is a subtle 6 dB per octave low-pass filter right here in the dynamic circuit, and no-coast is all about adding harmonics using the overtone and multiply circuits and not filtering them out, there is something to be said about a nicely resonant filter, especially one with character. Now, I'll be showing you how no-coast pairs with a Moog filter later on, but just for kicks, let's try this one. This filter is a recreation of the legendary MS-20 filters, and I'm playing them real gently here. But as you can hear, a filter is a really nice way to add depth to your sound. The next thing you might want to consider pairing alongside no-coast is additional voices. Now, there are plenty of options out there, and I really like Plaits from Mutable Instruments. Not just because it has plenty of algorithms and built-in tone generators and shaping options, but also because it has a built-in simple envelope generator and VCA that you can trigger either through the trigger input or VCA you can control through the level input. So you can just send it pitch and triggers or level, and you don't need a VCA and envelope to get sounds out of it. So to hook them up, all you need to do is take the CV output of no-coast and plug it into the volt per octave input of Plaits. And then you could control its envelope using any one of these two envelopes, or just trigger it with gate through the trigger or level inputs. And then you could take Plaits output either to your mixer or just bring it in to no-coast through the balance input. So if we hear just Plaits for a bit, I could choose the tone here, shape it, and then tune it to be in tune with no-coast. An alternative to just simply layering Plaits over no-coast would be to assign different MIDI channels to MIDI A on the no-coast and MIDI B on no-coast. Then you could, with external MIDI control or with a 2-channel sequencer, control each of the melodies generated by no-coast and Plaits separately. No-coast would just be an intermediary MIDI to CV converter. You could also use no-coast's slope as an LFO, let's say to change timbre in this sound. If you put it into cycle mode, slow it down, and then increase or decrease this to taste. You could also, of course, use slope as a one-time envelope. Just patch the gate output to trigger it. And then this motion would only happen once. So, Plaits and no-coast and reverb, of course, make really nice friends. Okay, let's move on and talk about VCAs. They say you can never have enough of them. I actually wouldn't put a VCA at the top of my list of modules to pair with no coast, but if you did happen to have one, as you may recall, you need one to pull off my pulse width modulation trick from last week. So as you may recall, if you bring the square wave into the balance input and then plug a second output into the linear FM control, you can get a pulse width modulation-like effect if you wiggle this knob. Now, doing that manually is no fun, and we can actually configure the CV output here to be an LFO, but there's no way to have that attenuate or move this knob for us. However, if we take this signal and pass it through a VCA, and then bring that back in to control linear FM, to control this knob, and the voltage we'll use to modulate that control will come from our built-in LFO, we effectively get pulse width modulation on the no coast. And with reverb. By the way, a bonus hack on top of last week's video, if you're willing to give up the contour envelope, you could create a pulse width modulation square wave style sound with this. I'll show you that patch real quickly. Just clear this up. You see, if we take our main oscillator output, plug that in to trigger the gate, and then use our controller gate to control dynamics so we don't always hear the sound. And I'll turn down reverb for this. Then take our LFO and plug it into the math section so we have control over it. And we use this LFO to control our contour decay. Then what comes out of the contour's end of onset is a pulse width modulation oscillator that can actually be controlled to go through 0 if you want rhythmic oscillations. And you control its speed, the modulation speed, by tapping its tempo into here. So I can go slow or fast. Yeah, so don't let anyone tell you no coast doesn't have PWM. Another category of modules I think you should look at when you consider friends for no coast are advanced multifunction modules like Ornament and Crime and Disting, and even Pam's new workout, which is a clock module that can also create clock synced LFOs. Each of these can do multiple things. The Disting is actually coming up on close to 100 different module options like a quantizer, tempo synced delay, and sample playback, but they do require having a manual close by and a willingness to do a little bit of menu diving. So if you're a knob per function kind of person, these modules aren't for you. Finally, if you have many sound sources, you'll need a mixer. The cheapest solution is probably an audio interface with multiple inputs so that you can record and process each of your elements separately. And if you want to go completely computerless, I'd recommend investing in a stereo mixer with CV-based level and pan controls so that you can dynamically control your levels and stereo field. Finally, I got a few comments asking how well Moog's DFAM would pair with no coast, and the answer is quite well actually. The idea in pairing them, other than just playing them side by side of course, is to leverage the strengths of one into the other and vice versa. As you may recall, I recommended pairing no coast with a filter sequencer and other interesting tone generators, and DFAM has all of those. A Moog ladder filter, 2 8-step sequencers, which can be plugged into no coast to control timbre or subharmonics, just like we did before, and FM and hard sync controls, though you could patch those on no coast as well. No coast also has quite a few things DFAM doesn't, like much more complex envelopes, random sample and hold, its overtone and multiply section of course, MIDI to CV, and LFO, and a bunch more. In this patch I'll be showing just a bit of what the two can do together. DFAM has 2 sequencers. Here I've got the top row sequencing subharmonics on no coast, and the ladder filter filtering those out. Subharmonics are sounds derived from this, the main oscillator, and DFAM has 2 oscillators. That's one. DFAM's bottom row is controlling velocity. I'll bring in DFAM's second oscillator, and its timbre is controlled by the sample and hold on no coast. So now that we have this in place, we can start kicking things up a notch. If you like this style of synth tips, tricks, and ideas, there's plenty more of it in my book available to people who support this channel on Patreon. Hit like if you learned something, click subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks for watching.